They tell you during training that routine is your anchor. Smile the same way. Walk the same path. Check the same latches. Know the exits. Secure the galley. Greet with warmth. Keep calm. Every flight is a performance. Rehearsed, polished, controlled. But routines only matter until something breaks them. And something did. On Orion Pacific Flight 716, this was supposed to be a simple route. San Diego to Vancouver. A 737, half full. Clear skies. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those quiet weekday flights where time floats more than flies. We were set to take off at 3:10 p.m. My name is Erin Vale. I've been a flight attendant for 11 years. That's 11 years of safety demos, crying babies, nervous flyers, aisle blockers, honeymooners, stressed out business suits, and late-night landings. I've memorized the pitch of every engine model, the temperature of every coffee dispenser, and the subtle difference between a comforting smile and a hollow one. But that day, I remember the sound of the air. Not the engine, not the chatter. The air. It felt heavier somehow, like the plane wasn't only lifting bodies, it was lifting secrets. The boarding was smooth. Too smooth. Everyone was quiet. A few families. An elderly couple with hands always intertwined. A man in 2A who kept checking his watch like it was ticking towards something tragic. I went through the motions. Bag check. Seatbelt demonstration. Emergency rows confirmed. Doors armed. Cabin secure. We pushed back right on time. Wheels up. Smooth climb. A little chop over Fresno, but nothing the passengers noticed. I always walk the cabin once right after takeoff. It gives me a read, not just on safety, but on energy. You can tell a lot from posture, eyes, silence. That day, something felt tense, like the cabin was holding a collective breath. Still, I smiled. I always do. That's what they teach you. You can be afraid, but never let them see it. I offered snacks, adjusted tray tables, laughed softly with the elderly woman who reminded me of my grandmother. She said I had steady hands. I don't think anyone ever told me that before. I remember looking out the window near row 18. The clouds looked like frozen waves. The kind of view that makes people forget to breathe for a second. I almost reached for my phone to take a picture. Almost. But I stopped. That's when the first flicker happened. The cabin lights dipped for just a second, like someone blinked the sky. It was enough to make heads lift. Just a flicker. But in aviation, nothing just happens. I looked toward the galley. The coffee maker clicked off. The microwave paused. Then everything came back. I walked to the cockpit door and knocked lightly. Routine. No answer. Also routine. Sometimes they're running checks. Still, I waited. Then returned to the galley. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last calm moment of the flight. Later, when the flight recorder is reviewed, maybe they'll hear nothing unusual until the final moments. Maybe they'll hear me humming softly in the galley. Or maybe, if we're honest, maybe they won't hear me at all. Maybe none of this will matter. Not the humming. Not the snacks. Not the way I smiled even when my chest felt like it was wrapped in invisible wires. But I want you to know, I noticed. I noticed the pressure drop before the instruments did. I noticed the right engine making a sound it shouldn't, a kind of rattling hush, like a breath that's trying not to cry. I noticed the look the captain gave the co-pilot during his restroom break. Too long, too knowing. I've worked hundreds of flights, but this one felt unfinished. We were at 36,000 feet when the real shake came. Not turbulence, a jolt. Sharp, uninvited, like we'd hit something that wasn't there. The seatbelt sign came on before the captain could speak. That never happens. Then the captain's voice cracked through the intercom, measured, calm, but clipped. Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a minor systems issue and will be making a precautionary descent. Please remain seated and buckled. That phrase, precautionary descent, is pilot code for, this could go bad, but we don't want to scare you yet. I walked down the aisle slowly. People asked questions with their eyes. I just nodded, smiled. Inside, I was calculating. Nearest alternate airport, reading time to descend. 7 to 9 minutes fire risk. Fuel dump needed. Cabin pressurization, normal, so far. Crew coordination, still silent. That silence was the loudest thing I heard all flight. When I reached the back row, I stood there for a moment. Just stood. The engine hum was lower now. I felt it through my shoes. Not like vibration, more like absence. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to be a reroute. This wasn't going to be a rough landing. This wasn't going to be fixed. And as the passengers stared out the window, still believing in landing gear and tarmac and future plan, I turned and walked to the galley, sat on the jump seat, and pulled out the small recorder I carried in my pocket. Not for black boxes, for stories. I had started journaling my thoughts after flights, just small voice memos, a way to remember who I was becoming in the sky, but now it would become something else, something final. But I didn't press record. Not yet. I still had a role to play, a cabin to calm, a crash to hide. For now. They say adrenaline sharpens your senses, that it kicks in to help you survive. But adrenaline didn't feel sharp at all. It felt quiet, focused, like someone whispering instructions in a voice I almost recognized. The descent had begun. Gentle, controlled, even polite. We were dropping, but not plummeting, the way you'd expect in a standard emergency landing. Except I knew what altitude was supposed to feel like. And this was slower, too slow. The passengers were holding on to hope with white-knuckle faith. Some were looking out the window like salvation was written on the clouds. Others had their heads down, scrolling aimlessly, pretending that if they didn't look up, it wouldn't be real. I envied them. I moved down the aisle again, checked belts, checked tray tables, smiled at a toddler who offered me a grape. I took it. She giggled. Her mother looked tired. I could tell she was a single parent traveling alone. You learn how to read people quickly in this job. It's a survival skill. I touched the top of the seat as I passed the elderly couple from boarding. Their hands were still together, unmoved by the announcements. I couldn't tell if they were brave or just done being afraid. I stopped near the cockpit. The door was locked, as it should be. But I could hear voices through it, just slightly raised. No words, just tone, tense, focused. The kind of voices that knew something they weren't allowed to say out loud. I returned to the galley and finally pulled out the recorder again. Small, smooth, familiar. My thumb hovered over the button like it always did when I was scared to admit something real. I pressed it. Click. If this doesn't get found, I'll never know, but if it does... My name is Erin Vale, and I was the lead flight attendant aboard Orion Pacific Flight 716, en route to Vancouver. We've begun a descent. It's being called precautionary. But I've worked this route before. I've worked hundreds of routes before. This isn't precaution. This is inevitable. I'm not scared. Not in the way I thought I would be. I'm sad. Sad that this is how my story ends. In uniform. In silence, in service, but also proud. Because I didn't run, I didn't cry. I walked the aisle. I smiled. I held the arm of the woman in 11C when the lights flickered again. I kept order in a world that was fraying quietly around the edges. The lights did flicker again. This time, longer. 3 seconds. enough for darkness to settle like a blanket across the faces of the passengers. When they came back on, the mood had changed. No one said it, but I saw it. They knew. The pilot made one more announcement. Calm, neutral, carefully worded. We're continuing to descend and evaluating weather conditions near Reading. You may experience some additional turbulence. Please remain seated. Thank you for your cooperation. No mention of fire, no mention of failure. But that's how it's done. You don't say crash. You don't say engine out. You don't say goodbye. You just say turbulence. As I looked down the aisle, I saw heads bow, not in prayer, in defeat. A man in the last row had tears in his eyes. He looked straight at me, didn't say anything. I nodded. He nodded back. That was enough. The cabin had entered what I can only describe as pre-grief. Not panic. Something worse. Acceptance. And that's when I smelled it. Burning. Faint, but real. Not from food or wiring, from the air. I went to the galley and opened the side hatch panel, just slightly. Outside the small porthole, smoke trailing from the right wing. Not flames, not yet. But the trail was there, thin, winding, gray. I closed it quickly. That was when I knew I needed to keep talking, even if no one ever heard it. We have smoke on the starboard side. It hasn't reached the cabin yet. I don't know if we'll lose pressurization. I don't know if we'll make it to the runway. I don't know if there's even a plan beyond gliding and guessing. But I do know this. People here are trying. The father in 5D just handed his phone to the passenger next to him, typed something and said, "Please send it if you can." The woman in 3B took the hand of a stranger when the jolt hit us a few minutes ago. She didn't ask. She just reached. And he let her. The teenage boy near the exit row has been whispering to himself. I leaned in and realized he was reciting his sister's favorite bedtime story, word for word. And me? I'm recording this. Because I need someone to know that we mattered, that this flight wasn't just numbers and fuel and statistics, that we were human, and that I didn't run from it. Suddenly, thud, a loud one, from under the cabin. Then a vibration that didn't stop. The emergency lights flickered on. No announcement, just silence. Then a scream, from near the rear. A woman had seen flames outside the window. I stood up from the jump seat. My legs didn't shake. They should have. But they didn't. Because routine kicked in. Not panic. Training. I walked toward the woman. I took her hand. I said nothing. Just looked in her eyes until she stopped screaming. Then I turned toward the cockpit again and waited. Waited for the next sound. The one no one wants to hear. The one that ends the sky. Let me know when you're ready for part 3. The descent into silence, where the crash becomes undeniable, and Erin begins the core of her final message to the world. The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was a moment suspended in disbelief. No one asked questions anymore. No one demanded answers. They simply watched. As if they could will the sky to bend, I stood in the aisle, somewhere near row 17, as the plane continued its slow descent. Every now and then, we'd lurch, just slightly, like the aircraft itself was flinching, trying to delay what was already in motion. There were no more announcements. Just the quiet. I walked back toward the galley. My legs moved on instinct. I passed a man holding a rosary, a child sleeping through it all, a teenager frantically typing on his phone, though there was no signal anymore. I reached my jump seat, sat down, and pressed record again. If this is still working, if the battery holds, then maybe, just maybe, someone will hear this. And if not, well, I have to keep speaking anyway. Not for answers, for presence. The smoke's getting stronger. The scent clings to the vents. I've turned off the galley power, secured everything that could move. The fire hasn't broken through, but the heat is rising. Not dramatically, just subtly. That's the worst kind. The kind that gives you hope until it doesn't. The captain hasn't spoken in almost 15 minutes. That silence means one thing. They're trying everything. Every checklist. Every emergency system. Every alternate runway. Every prayer they still believe in. And we're gliding. I can feel it. We're not flying anymore. We're falling. Politely. Outside the window near the wing, I caught glimpses of Earth. Hills. Trees. Roads that looked like threads sewn into the skin of the world, but none of them were close enough. I looked at my hands. No shaking. Just stillness. Like my body knew this was its last performance. I thought about the first flight I ever worked. I was 22nd. Nervous. Over-smiling. I spilled orange juice on a passenger, panicked, apologized 100 times. He laughed and said, "If this is the worst thing that happens today, we're lucky." I never forgot that. And now, as this plane falls in silence, I find myself hoping he was right. I want to speak directly now. To anyone who might be hearing this after. Maybe you're an investigator, or a journalist, or maybe, just maybe, you're someone who knew me. I want you to know I tried. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I did my job. I walked that aisle until the very last safe second. I looked into people's eyes. I touched shoulders. I gave instructions even when I knew they wouldn't matter. And when it became clear that none of us were going to walk off this aircraft, I stayed. Because this is what we're trained to do. But training doesn't teach you how to say goodbye. Not like this. So let me try. I thought about my mother. About how she always worried when I flew, even after all these years. I thought about the voicemail I left her this morning. Something dumb. Casual. "Hey, just landed in San Diego. Call you later." I didn't say, "I love you." God, how many people forget to say it? How many people get so used to having more time? I thought about the friend I lost last year. Car accident. No warning. Just gone. She used to say, "If I die suddenly, I hope it's on a Tuesday." I hate Tuesdays anyway. It's Tuesday. I smiled at that. The vibration changed again. This time, it wasn't turbulence. It was wind. Rushing faster. Louder. A whine. A pitch I'd never heard before. A few people screamed this time, not loud, not long, just short, shocked sounds, like they'd run out of fear and were down to instinct. Over the intercom, the first officer's voice came through, strained, breathless. "Brace!" That's all. That's the word we're trained to give, not an explanation, not a warning, just brace. I stood up from the jump seat and shouted it again. Voice strong, projected, memorized. Heads down, stay down, brace, brace, brace. The cabin became a sea of folded bodies, arms crossed over heads, eyes shut. I moved through the aisle once more, quickly, corrected positions, calmed hands, whispered when I could. I stopped at row 7. The little girl was still holding the grape she gave me earlier. She looked at me, didn't speak. I gave her the best smile I had left. She smiled back. Then I ran back to my jump seat. Strapped in. Picked up the recorder again. I guess this is it. To the people I love, I hope you know. I hope you felt it, even when I didn't say it. To my fellow crew, you were brave. You were steady. You gave more than anyone will ever understand. And to the passengers, you weren't just bodies and seats. You were names, faces, memories. You were stories. And now, you're part of mine. Outside I saw ground now. Too fast. Too real. The world coming up like it was tired of waiting. The recorder was still on. The lights were still flickering. And above the noise, I whispered one final thing. Not for the recording. just for myself. I hope someone remembers us. The ground was no longer distant. It was here, below us, rising fast. The cabin was a held breath stretched across rows and hearts. There were no more whispers, no more questions, no more negotiations with fate. We were past that now. Time had thinned. I sat in my jump seat, recorder still in hand, and watched as everything we were came down to a single moment. Not the crash itself, but the silence before it. That's the part no one tells you about. How quiet it is, how sacred, how heavy. We are descending rapidly. Impact is imminent. This will be my last entry, not because I've run out of things to say, but because this is where saying ends. I looked down the aisle one last time. Every head was down. Every soul braced not just for the crash, but for the truth. That there would be no more tomorrows. I could see it in the posture of the man in 2A, the one who had checked his watch all flight. His hands were now folded over his chest, his eyes closed, accepting. The elderly couple, still holding hands. The teenage boy had stopped reciting his story and was now just mouthing the final line, over and over again. And the little girl with the grape? She was watching me, eyes wide, not afraid, just searching, as if I had the ending she needed. I smiled, nodded, held her gaze, then turned forward again. The truth is, I don't want to go. I want more time, not for adventures, not for grandeur, for simple things. I want one more slow morning, one more cup of coffee that's too hot, one more hug from my mom where she holds on just a second longer than she needs to, one more bad joke from my coworker on the shuttle bus, one more boarding call, one more day where the hardest thing is a gate change, but I don't get more. So I'll give this. My voice, my breath, my last trace. Because if we disappear from the sky and no one remembers us, it's like we were never real. The plane began to pitch, not violently, just purposefully, like it had decided something, like it was no longer a machine, but a creature fulfilling the gravity it was born to obey. I could hear things shifting behind the walls, metal tightening, wind screaming louder now. Like it too, knew this was the final verse. The recorder was still on, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. I held it against my chest. If someone finds this, please, tell the world about us. Tell them that we were kind in the end, that no one fought, that strangers held hands, that silence became something holy. Tell them a little girl gave her last grape to a flight attendant. Tell them that even when the sky broke, we still believed in each other. I closed my eyes. In my mind, I wasn't in a cabin anymore. I was 7 years old again, lying on a blanket in my backyard, staring at the stars. My dad beside me, pointing out constellations. Orion, Cassiopeia, the ones I'd later see from airplane windows and whisper hello to in lonely skies. He told me the stars were stories. I never really understood what he meant. Until now. I heard a scream, but not fear. It was love, shouted in one final burst. Someone said, "I love you," like it was the only thing that mattered. They were right. Everything else fell away. The whine became a roar. My heartbeat became thunder in my ears. The recorder slipped slightly in my grip, and I whispered, one final time, "Let us be remembered not for how we fell, but for how we stayed with each other until the end." Impact was a light before it was a sound, a brightness that erased form, detail, time. Then a sound that had no name. The cabin let go, the air let go, the sky let go, and then, nothing. No more falling, no more sky, no more waiting. Just stillness. Just silence. Just stories, left behind like footprints on clouds.